And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story, because your story matters. 8 minutes after 6. Good evening to you. Welcome to the program. Friday, of course. I'm Stephen Grootes. Lots going on in a way. A lot of people, of course, just watching what's happening with oil markets. They seem to be relatively benign. Not a great day for gold, unfortunately, but certainly things beginning to move. The story probably around what happened at Steinhoff today and the latest jail term being handed down. And this goes down to a fake invoice, 376 million rand it was for. Such a strange story because it was handwritten. I can't imagine anyone, even dare I say a government department, accepting a handwritten invoice, but Steinhoff did. The person who actually handed it in actually said that they kind of have admitted now that they knew it was fake and was with Marcus Jooste when he suggested, when he handed it to him on a plane flight. Such an extraordinary story. You may remember a little while ago, we spoke to Mantengo Mining, and they're very angry. They wanted to know more information about share trades on the JSE. Well, another company called Intlantla Ventures has now gone to the information regulator and said to the JSE, we want to know more information about the people who are involved in trading our shares. The JSE first said no, so they lodged a PIRE application, a Promotion of Access to Information Act application. The JSE still said no. And now the information regulator has said to the JSE, you can't just say no. What you have to do is actually go to the people who traded in the shares and tell them that this is what Intlantla Ventures wants, and give them a chance to sort of oppose it. Part of it gets to a conversation around whether the JSE is a public body or a private entity, and it is sort of privately owned. Its shares are traded on the JSE, so it's a public company in that way. But, I mean, I don't see how you could argue that the JSE is not a sort of public body. Yes, it's not linked to government, nor should it be. But the way I see it, I mean, and how important it is to our economy, it would make sense to me that it be seen in that way. Anyway, we'll get a deeper understanding of it. Some of the technicalities around it are quite tricky. We have raised this with the JSE CEO before, but we'll hear from Caroline James from the Amabongani Center for Investigative Journalism. And then, I don't know where you go out in the evening, if you do. There was a time I wondered if Joburg's nightlife would ever come back, actually, because there was the lockdown, there was intense load shedding. I remember friends of mine would visit from Cape Town and say, gosh, does anyone in Joburg still go out? Now, you can absolutely see that economy has recovered. You really can. You go out on a Friday evening, you'll see that economy is recovered. We'll speak to Glenn Stutchburry. He's the operations director at Legacy Hotels and Resorts, and he also runs the Alto234 Bar. It's at the top of the Leonardo. So South Africa's sort of highest restaurant, if you like, the view. And what that does to the drinking, the dining experience, I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. Looking forward to that. Good to hear from you tonight. 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567. Don't forget, a little later, the Friday Biz Blitz as well. And voice notes, of course, on 072-702-1702.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, there's a fascinating story that's been developing over the last couple of days about Iran. So first, Iran was confirmed to have sent ships to take part in the war games taking place off Simonstown. Then we were told, well, there were several reports indicating that, in fact, Iran had been asked to withdraw, and that the order for them to essentially be asked to withdraw by the SANDF, so the SANDF had to do the asking, had come from the president to the defense minister, Angie Motshekga. Then we saw Iranian ships taking part in the exercise. That led, as you can imagine, to a response from the US Embassy here, sort of asking questions about that. And now the minister, Angie Motshekga, has instituted what's called in the SANDF a board of inquiry. I think they've actually only got a week or so to report back. Now, there's several questions here. The one thing that hasn't happened is that no official has come forward and said, no, Iran was not playing an active role. They were just observing. We haven't seen that. And you would think that if that was the case, someone would have said that by now. So then that raises another question. Who would dare defy a presidential instruction when the stakes are so high? And let me just be very clear about this. You and I live in a country where around 49%, according to Afrobarometer, 49% of people believe a military government would be better than the democracy we have now. You can understand why if you look at what's happening around so many people. So it is vitally, critically important that if it turns out that someone in the military did in fact defy civilian authority, they need to be dealt with. We cannot have a situation where actually people in the military are able to defy civilian authority. Just imagine the consequences. And imagine what that does to our economy too in the longer run, because no one knows who's really in charge. It's an absolutely vital thing to get on top of. So I'll be paying very close attention to that board of inquiry. 13 minutes now after 6.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes
On 702.
702.
Well, one of the key figures in part of the Steinhoff fraud, now being sentenced to 5 years in jail for signing an invoice for 376 million rand that he knew was fake. Iwan Shelbert was given the invoice by Marcus Jooste while they were on a flight. He then passed it on to the company as a legitimate invoice. Rob Rose is the editor at Currency News and author of Steinhoff. Also, of course, behind that Showmax miniseries. Rob, good evening. What role did Iwan Shelbert play in Steinhoff? What did he actually do here?
Evening, Stephen. Good to chat. So the real issue is the 376 million rand invoice, which was fictitious, which Marcus Jooste had created on a plane back to South Africa and handed to his finance director, Ben Lachranji, and said to him, please can you process this and put this money into Steinhoff. So Ben then took the invoice and he passed it through Steinhoff's various ranks, and magically 376 million rand appeared as if from nowhere in Steinhoff's accounts through a company called Steinhoff at Work. And this transformed a loss-making division into a fantastically profitable entity and ultimately led to the retailer looking a lot more profitable. And Iwan Shelbert was the guy who made it happen. He was one of the people to whom Ben Lachranji had passed the invoice and said, can you process this through the books?
I mean, it would be bizarre for anyone to take a handwritten invoice and just process it through the books. Did he just believe Marcus Jooste? He must have known that it was fake.
Well, that's the argument that the prosecutors make. I mean, what they did say, according to the story from News24, from Jan at News24, is that essentially that he was ultimately loyal to Marcus Jooste and had believed what the executives told him. He was more a patsy in this particular scheme. But, as you'll appreciate, Stephen, I mean, once Marcus Jooste committed suicide, there was nobody to hold responsible for this. So ultimately, the people down the line who processed these fake numbers are going to be held accountable. So the issue is, if you get a 376 million rand handwritten invoice and you put it through the books without making further inquiries about where this comes from, you'll ultimately be held responsible. The issue of whether he himself knew it was fake right from the outset is a question that I think is more culpable. It's more negligence than essentially intention at this particular point.
Are there any bigger fish than he, who are still alive?
Yeah, I mean, essentially there's Stian Grobler, who was the company's secretary for a while, and he's going to court soon to answer charges in the next month. He's probably the biggest fish left. The finance director, Ben Lachranji, who we mentioned just now, he's already serving a 5-year term for this particular fraud. But then the real people who made this happen for Marcus Jooste sat in Europe. They're the ones who ultimately created these fake invoices and were very much in on the scheme. And they themselves are serving prison sentences, but in Germany. So, there are people in prison cells, in jail cells across the world, just not necessarily in South Africa. So there have been 3 convictions so far in South Africa, of which Lachranji is one and in jail, and Shelbert will be the second.
It's interesting that Shelbert in the end pleaded guilty. He presumably didn't have much of a choice, and it still took quite a long time. And I mean, you and I before have discussed the complexity of this case, but it's nearly 10 years later.
Stephen, it talks to prosecution strategy, because this particular case, when you get a handwritten invoice that is just simply fictitious, would seem to be very obvious to prove. And it's the same with the insider trading case, where Marcus Jooste sent SMSs to his friends and said, please sell the shares because Steinhoff's going to collapse. And a week later it did collapse. Now those are slam dunk cases. So the prosecution service and dallied over for a number of years before deciding how to approach it. Are we going to include every single charge to throw at these guys or just these particular ones? In the end, it took them, this happened in 2017. We're now in 2016, so it's essentially 8-9 years before this actually came to court. And all they could actually ultimately get on one or two people was the very obvious stuff they probably could have got in the first year. So it speaks to a lack of coherence, I think, in the prosecution service about dealing with these big crimes, because you're absolutely right. This could have been done in the first year.
In a strange way, we're now getting towards the end of this entire story. Very complex, very interesting, staggering in the consequences, both for Marcus Jooste and in terms of the financial losses. But finally, after a very long time, the story seems to be coming to an end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the company itself has sort of fallen apart right now. The actual operating entities are still there. Pepcore, the current Pepcore, owns part of the assets that used to be under Steinhoff. So the actual company itself is virtually non-existent. And the people who were involved in the fraud, well, they're in jail or dead. And it does feel something of a Pyrrhic victory, the fact that there are people going to jail when Marcus Jooste himself never sat in a jail cell. You would have wanted the guy who constructed this fraud to be in the dock to say, to answer why did you do this? What caused you to do this? So it is a bit of an empty victory, but, at least for a country that needed to prove that it can nail the white-collar criminals, at least people are in jail.
Rob Rose, thank you so much. Such an important point. Editor at Currency News, author of Steinheist.
The Money Show. Explainer.
19 after 6. Well, confirmation now that the information regulator has told the JSE it was wrong to refuse to give details about some share trades to the firm Inklantla Ventures. Inklantla Ventures said it believed some of the trades might be suspicious. Now, the JSE has to tell all of the people involved in the trades that Inklantla Ventures wants information about them so they can make representations on whether the records can be released. Caroline James is the advocacy coordinator at the Amabongani Centre for Investigative Journalism. Caroline, good evening. What exactly does Inklantla Ventures actually want here?
Evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on. I think the key aspect that Inklantla wants to find out is who made trades during a set period of time in which a specific company's share price dropped dramatically, and they want to understand why that happened, and so they want to know who traded that share in that specific period of time. It was a period of a few days in May 2020.
If I were them in that position, I'd probably want the same information. They're not the only one who's been in that position. The JSE refused to hand it over. Did they explain why?
So what had happened was Inklantla filed an application under the Promotion of Access to Information Act to the JSE for this information. And the JSE said that they were bound by the legislation that governs the JSE, the Financial Markets Act, which prevents them providing any confidential information to a third party. They said that law meant that they couldn't provide the information and refused the application. And that was when Inklantla then went to the information regulator, which is this new body where you can file a complaint if you believe that a request under the Promotion of Access to Information Act has been incorrectly decided.
The JSE's attitude seems to be, and not just in this case, but in others, that this information is confidential. But in the end, you have a share register. You have to kind of know who owns a company. And it would seem rational that a company should also know who owns them. So on balance, and I realize that you and I are both journalists, so we want as much information as possible, and there are other ways to see the world. But I can't help but feel that in the end, a company should have the right to know what's going on with their shares.
I completely agree. And I think the important thing is that the JSE plays an important regulatory function. It's got a public function in South Africa. We all know that these are sort of publicly traded shares. And as you say, there is some information that is made publicly accessible. And there's a good reason for that. As you say, companies do need to know, and people need to know who's got shares in different companies. And this really is just a sort of extension of that principle to understand what is happening sort of behind the scenes. Breaching the sort of corporate veil about what's going on amongst all these sort of share trading that companies and brokers and individuals do.
The people who actually traded the shares, as I understand it, now have to be contacted by the JSE, and that could actually be quite a process. They have to give representations. I presume they could now say to the JSE, no, don't hand over this information.
Yeah, I think that's a very important aspect of this finding from the information regulator. So although they found that they would order that the information should be disclosed by the JSE, they said that the JSE hadn't adhered to its legal obligations, that when they receive a request, you have to notify any third party who may be implicated by the request. But the important aspect of that is that the party who's received the request and has to notify these third parties doesn't have to get consent from those third parties. So all you have to do is hear the representations. So you're completely correct, and it's probably likely that any third party will say they don't consent to that information being disclosed. But that's not the be-all and end-all. That's just the representations that they would make to the JSE, or in this situation, the information regulator has a role to play in it. But the question is that these sorts of bodies receiving these information have to consider both sides. So they have to consider the request made for access to information, and then to consider what the third parties involved may say, whether or not they would consent or not. That's not the sort of crux of the decision that has to be made.
I'm trying to think of what a legitimate reason might be for Stephen to say, I'm buying shares in Caroline's company, but I don't want Caroline to know that. I mean, I'm sure someone somewhere will have a legitimate reason that I haven't thought of, but I can't think of one.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, as you said, we are sort of believe in transparency and the importance behind transparency and push for that. So for us, that does make perfect sense for us to be able to have all this information, and for someone who might be also invested in my company to understand whether you have bought shares or not and when you have. I think we definitely are on the same page around that. And certainly at Amabongani, we're pushing for much greater corporate transparency across the board.
The Mantengo mining case, which I know your colleagues have reported on in the past, it's a very complex case. The accusations that Mantengo mining make haven't all been properly supported. But I presume what happens here could set a precedent for that, and then for other cases too. This won't be the last.
No, it certainly won't be. And I think that's why the JSE has indicated that they are likely to take this decision from the information regulator on review to the High Court. I think they believe that this is an issue that needs to be ventilated in judicial proceedings. They see it as an important transparency and corporate transparency case. We obviously believe and agree with the information regulator's findings that these trade information should be transparent and made public when it's been requested for. But I think you're certainly right. This is a case that can definitely set precedent, and we may very well see the JSE approaching court to try and get a firm judicial precedent on this issue.
I don't know off the top of my head how much information a company listed in London or New York would get about share trading in their shares. I don't know if you've done any research on that.
This certainly is not my specific area of expertise, but I think the important thing is that we have to maintain that we are governed by the constitutional regime of the South African Constitution. And many courts have highlighted that the reason we have such a strong protection of transparency and access to information in our Constitution is because of the very opaque system of governance, both politically and in business, that was sort of really in place during the apartheid regime. And we have to recognize that there's a specific history and a specific constitutional regime that governs our laws around transparency.
Caroline James, thank you so much. The advocacy coordinator at the Amabongani Centre for Investigative Journalism. Can you think of a reason why a company should not be told who owns their shares or who traded in their shares at a particular time? There might be a technical reason that I'm not aware of, or some kind of trading advantage. 072 702 1702, please. 26 minutes after 6.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Zwelakhe Mguni is the Chief Investment Officer at Benguela Global Fund Manager. Zwelakhe, good evening. Avenge down 5.88% on the day. Their CEO's resigned, and he's only been there for 2 years, and it's a company that does seem to be in a tight spot.
Good evening, Stephen. I think one thing is that we maybe underestimated the challenge of operating that construction company. I think he was tired, and I think they said he's retiring, but it's been quite a challenge in that sector across the board. I mean, you remember that Basil Reed and Marion Roberts, they've filed for business rescue. So it's been a difficult sector to operate in, low government expenditure. The construction mafias have also played a role. So it is putting Avenge, maybe it's an opportunity to reset, but it's a challenging environment overall.
And I mean, the fact that they went to Australia, you would have thought, I mean, so many companies have done that, and it's been so difficult.
It has been difficult, and I think one of the things that they had in Australia was all these litigations around the expansion of the mandate when they were given contracts and not delivering on time. So those things have actually eaten into their liquidity in that market. But that is why we also saw Wilson Bailey actually cutting out the liquidity supply to their business in Australia, ProBuild, I think 3 years ago. So there is an element of discipline that's required to operate in that market, and also the complexity of the projects that you take can play a role. And I think out of desperation, companies like this, they are Avenge. They've basically pivoted way too much into more complicated projects, and that has cost them to some extent.
The Rand seems to be set to have another week of gains. It seems to be sort of consistently stronger. Probably, you know, if you'd asked me at the end of last year, where would it be now? I wouldn't have guessed it would be as strong as it is now. And it seems to be fairly stable.
No, it is indeed. I think if I look back about a year ago, we were sitting 1852 and we are sitting at 1643. So that's a massive gain, I mean, for the Rand by historic standards. So I think the monetary policy and inflation targeting has helped to some extent, but the political stability has also helped. And I think the credit rating improvement has helped. The FATF grey listing has also helped. So the commodity prices are playing a good role because we're exporting a lot of gold and platinum, and we sell the dollars that we earn and buy the rands again to convert to local. So that has also been quite beneficial. And I think that the dollar itself has been generally weaker in the last 12 months.
And I mean, if you think about it, we have a little bit of growth this year. Say we get to 2% next year, and we end up in a situation where the dollar continues what it's doing. There might be some scope for even more growth for the Rand, even more strengthening.
No, certainly. I think we should hold up between 16 and 17 at least. And if our growth comes through strongly, I think it would help us to get even below 16, but we've got a base case of around 16 to 17. And I think the main thing is that the fiscal management has been very good, the monetary policy has been good, and the political stability seems to be driving some reforms that have led in the transport sector, and we are seeing a bit of stability, and that is positive at a time when the U.S. is facing some headwinds around the geopolitics. So it is beneficial to us, and we could even see an even better Rand.
Zwelaka, thanks so much. Zwelaka Mgune is the Chief Investment Officer of Benguela Global Fund Managers. Bringing the time to 6:30.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
22 minutes to 7 the time. In a moment, we'll speak to Glenn Stutchburry, the Operations Director at Legacy Hotels and Resorts, about Alto234 at the Leonardo. It's a rooftop bar. A bit more than that, really, I suppose I should say. News late last night that Hyprop, the property company, had said that a proposed sale of the Hyde Park Corner shopping centre, that's in Joburg, was not going to go through. The potential seller had not met all of the conditions. Interesting to just sort of think about what's happening with some of the sort of high-profile, kind of upper-market sort of shopping centres. It does seem that one or two of them are battling a little bit, but there are also signs of recovery. So Hyde Park, they say, is doing quite well. Their vacancies are down. They've improved the tenant mix. I don't know what that means for the people who've left, but it certainly means something. I was also, and I remember speaking to Sean Summers about the fact that Pick and Pay was giving up its long-term lease at Hyde Park. They've been replaced by Checkers. Some things in life are inevitable, and I think that was one of them. I've also, of course, heard recently that Fourways Mall's been recovering. That's had a rough time, but it does seem slowly to be improving. How are you feeling about your shopping malls at the moment? 072 702 1702. 20 minutes to 7.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
17 minutes to 7. And as I turn my head to the left in the Sandton area of Joburg, I can just see shining through kind of another building the last embers of the sun. Still going to be up for a little while. There are some sunsets in Joburg, especially when you've sort of had a little bit of rain, where the sun actually, where the sky turns almost pink, or very much pink. And if you look out over Joburg, you'll see thousands of trees. And there are some businesses that, of course, want to take advantage of that. One of them is called the Alto234 Bar. It's on top of the Leonardo Hotel in Sandton. It describes itself as Africa's highest bar. I'm not going to argue with them on that. And the person who runs it is sitting in front of me now. His name is Glenn Stutchburry. He's the operations manager at Legacy Hotels and Resorts. Glenn, thanks so much for coming in.
Only a pleasure, Stephen. Thanks very much for having me.
There must be something about height, about the view in front of you, that makes the experience of going to that bar very different from going to many other places.
I think it's that whole feeling of being on top of the world. At the end of the day, the great thing about being on Alto is you watching aeroplanes almost fly underneath you as they come into ORT, that kind of experience. And the reality is the whole of Joburg is all around you.
Mm. And you can actually walk around. There's a 360 view. So
Full 360.
If you don't like the view in one place, or it reminds you of where you used to live or something, you can go and look at something else.
Yeah. A lot of people, as soon as they get up, their first reaction is, okay, where's my house?
Yeah.
And there's that touring around the building. But there's obviously the favorites, and the sunset deck is remarkable. So this time of day, that'll be pretty crowded with people wanting to experience the ultimate sunset.
Was it difficult to get it up there? I mean, you've got obviously there are lots of buildings in Joburg. Some of them will be taller than yours, I suppose, not many. But the idea of actually running it like that, you've got to have lifts and things that work. I remember as a kid going to the Carlton Centre and being quite scared, actually.
Yeah, it's a remarkable building in that respect, because there's 14 elevators in the building, and only one of them will get you to Alto.
Of course.
And that one gets you to the top. It was great fun. In fact, last month there's over 6,000 steps to get to the top of the building, and we had the firefighters race to the top of the building. And I mean, that was these guys running up that building with 25 kilos of kit.
Sheesh.
Was remarkable.
The type of business that you do, you obviously want to attract a certain clientele. You want to attract people who have other options. You want to attract people who are interested in drinking certain things. Your product range, you can't just give them normal plonk. You can't give them, a fizzy wine. You've got to give them something quite special in terms of attracting them there.
Sure. You don't go all the way to that kind of environment and like you say, have normal plonk. We have a great partnership. Our drink of choice at the top is Moet. And we happen to have the only vending machine for distributing Moet minis on the roof. And that was a whole part of our experience of making sure that you had little different things to do at the top.
Yeah, I mean, when people get to the top, they look around. Do they eventually stop looking at the view and sort of get down to, focusing more on the bar? I mean, the bar has to look as nice as the view.
Yes, I think, the fact what we made important up there is that everyone would have a seat. Everyone could have an experience. And it wasn't just a sit at a bar and have a drink. There's a great tapas menu up there. Obviously, it features the right product like oysters and salmon and tuna, a Wagyu slider rather than a standard slider, etc. So those products make for great value add to the experience of just being on the roof and seeing Joburg. We forget how awesome Joburg is. And I think one of the amazing things we see is how many Joburg people now use Leonardo as their go-to. I'm going to Alto because I need to show people who are visiting me our city. Because where else do you go to show off Joburg?
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting point. Do you get very different type of business in different seasons? So in winter, the sun can go down by 5:30. It can be quite chilly, especially at altitude.
Indeed. There's a bit of wind up there too.
Yes. In summer, I mean, you probably go until past 7 o'clock.
Oh, for sure. We sort of run it on 3 viewing times. So you've got the afternoon, the sunset, and the night lights. And even the best thing about being at Alto is to go for sunset and then watch Joburg turn from sunset into night and just see the lights of Joburg. It is just remarkable. So there are these 3 sessions and people enjoy all of them, but you can choose which one. In winter, it is naturally sunset and then probably down to Aurum to have a nice meal because that's a little bit warmer. It does get chilly up there, but we've got fireplaces up there. We've got heaters. We've got mowed blankets. And, champagne does warm you.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, a mowed blanket meant something else to me when I was younger. I was just thinking, you're talking about watching the lights come on and thinking, gosh, watching that during load shedding must have been a very depressing thing.
We could definitely tell who had load shedding.
Yes.
You could have phoned us and we could have told you.
Did load shedding hurt your business? And let me just explain where I go. I'm sure you have all of the 24-hour power kit and all the rest. That's not what I'm asking. I'm sure the lift works. Which is that I got a sense that during load shedding, and especially coming out of the pandemic, people didn't really want to go out so much, in Joburg in particular. And friends from Cape Town would actually come up and say, gosh, people don't go out in Joburg anymore. But now, I really get a very different sense. I get a sense that the nightlife is back. Last year, I was driving towards the G20 at about 2:30 in the morning. And I mean, there were traffic jams in Rosebank. We all know which company we can blame for that at 2:30 on a Saturday morning.
For sure, yes.
What's that experience been like for you?
There was a remarkable shift for us because the post-COVID period for the hospitality sector was a desperate measure by us to try and get back into the world.
Yeah.
Because we'd been so decimated. I guess certain people fell on the right side of the COVID fence and hospitality didn't.
Yeah. No.
But it was great because people then came back almost with a vengeance. We are really tired of being locked up and it's time for us to get out and it's time for us to enjoy ourselves. And that gave us an opportunity for this. We did open Leonardo 2 weeks before COVID. So,
yes.
Alto didn't have an opportunity to show its glory, shall we say. So we showed it off post-COVID and the markets enjoyed it and they love it. Whether it be a corporate event where you block the whole thing, or the one thing that's funny is the amount of people who get engaged up there.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate, okay, listen, I can tick this off and bank it. I got engaged at the highest bar in Africa and she said yes.
She had no choice. Look, people love an effort. I mean, years ago, I was living in London and a friend of mine actually woke his partner up very early and put her on the Eurotunnel, on the train to Paris. And as the sun came up, proposed to her. He said to me a week later that all the women he told the story to went, and all the men he told the story to hated him because he'd really raised the bar. And I think maybe Alto's doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think the worst would be if you go to that kind of effort, because we have a private deck for it. We have the candles.
Someone
and
playing
the
music or
roses
something.
Yes, the whole number, and the mini moes coming out of the vending machine, and you really want to be sure because that's not the place to have a no.
Yeah, well, you'd remember that. I have a little plaque. She said no here. Not everybody drinks champagne.
Sure.
I'm one of them. I'll have a glass, but I won't have more than that. Have you noticed any trends? I mean, it seems to me in Joburg there are quite a few places that specialize in having certain types of sort of what I would call a specialty liqueur. I would say certain whiskies that they must have a big collection, maybe bourbons, things like that. I presume you do the same thing?
Yeah, we do. I think people, there's always a part of the party that is the designated driver.
Yeah.
So suddenly the non-alcoholics are taking off, and you you really see that where people are, one person's always on the non-alcoholics. Yes, Scotch is a big thing up there for us. And it is the kind of place that says, I need a cocktail.
Yeah, of course.
So, cocktails come in, whether they're alcoholic or non-alcoholic. It's a great opportunity for us to experiment up there.
Have you noticed any trends or changes in what people drink? I mean, do you have a year where this particular brand of something, Moet or something else, is very popular, and the next year something else sort of takes its place?
Yes, I think it's constantly moving, and strangely enough, if you look at the Joburg drinking market in terms of clubs and lounges, etc., a lot of it was around tenderpreneurs and the show-off. Thankfully, we've kind of passed that stage. Now people are actually drinking what they like to drink.
Yes.
There's still a very definite move towards some of the slightly showy items. You want a Verve, you want a Moet, you want a Dom, especially up on the roof. The other kind of move is towards Hennessy's and Don Julio's and having a bottle service and a whole round for you and your friends. That also moves nicely now.
I have plans tonight. Oh, well. Glenn Stutchburry, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for coming in. I really do appreciate it. The Operations Director at Legacy Hotels and Resorts, talking tonight about Alto234 at the Leonardo. It's a fascinating idea. And I can't help but feel that there might be a little competition for it at some point in the future. 6 minutes now to 7.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
Time now for the Friday Biz Blitz. You know how it works, of course. We put out a question. You phone us on 011-883-0702, 0214460567. If you get the answer right, we move on to the next question. If you get it wrong, we move on to the next caller. So, first question tonight on the Friday Biz Blitz. Which company announced it will close its only cigarette manufacturing plant in South Africa by the end of 2026? First question tonight on the Friday Biz Blitz. 011-883-0702, 0214460567. Which company announced it will close its only cigarette manufacturing plant in South Africa by the end of 2026? The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. First question tonight on the Friday Biz Blitz. Which company announced it will close its only cigarette manufacturing plant in South Africa by the end of 2026? Khotso in Naledi. Khotso, hi. Do you know the answer?
Yes, absolutely.
Go for it.
It's British American Tobacco.
Khotso, of course you are correct. Okay, here we go. Second question. Which South African financial leader publicly joined global central bank governors in defending the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve and its chair, Jerome Powell? Who from South Africa spoke out, Khotso?
Yeah, pass.
Khotso, I can't let you pass. I can let you take a guess, but we can't pass. Khotso. I'm gonna have to move on. Sorry, Khotso, you're gonna kick yourself. All right. First, second question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Which South African financial leader publicly joined global central bank governors in defending the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve and its chair, Jerome Powell? Who from South Africa was speaking out about that and signed a joint statement this week with central bank governors? Who was it? 011-883-0702 and 0214460567. We have questions also about rare earths. We have questions about football, and we have questions about the Grammy Awards tonight. But first, we have to get past this one, I'm afraid. Question 2 tonight. Which financial leader from South Africa joined global central bank governors in defending the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve and its chair, Jerome Powell? If you've been listening to The Money Show, if you've been paying any attention at all to events in the world, Well, I'd like to think that you would know. Maybe you're just feeling a little bit nervous about coming on air. We'll be very kind, I promise. But 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. Which South African joined global central bank governors in defending the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve is our current question on the Friday Biz Blitz. And obviously, of course, it's been a very interesting story. Ravi in Johannesburg, hi.
Is it Cognac? Our finance, Cognac. Wow, the name slipped my mind. Add it to my mind. Sorry about that.
I kind of feel that we can probably give it to you because I think I don't know. I actually am getting a bit of pushback on that. I don't know if we can. Sorry, Ravi. Okay, and I've been overruled on that. So no, overruled quite. Looking at the person who overruled me, overruled quite seriously on that. Let's see if someone else can get the answer right. Who was it who joined central bank governors in defending the independence of the U.S. Federal Reserve? It's not that hard a question, I would have thought. I think you've been paying attention. Mazefa in Swane, hi.
Hi,
Go
is it Lesetja Kanyako?
Mazefa, it is Lesetja Kanyako. Congratulations. You've won the Friday Biz Blitz tonight on The Money Show. It's just gone 7 o'clock.